Welcome to the conversation. I'm Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Joining us today is David BECKER. He is the executive director at the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Benjamin.
I've had a chance to look into your background and the significance of the work that you have done for voting and voting rights, voting protection. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
So I've been in elections for over 2 decades now. I started as a lawyer with the Justice Department in first the Clinton administration and then the Bush administration doing voting rights work in the Civil Rights Division, and then eventually found my way over to the Pew Charitable Trust, where I led their elections work for several years. And in 2016, I founded the Center for Election Innovation and Research. And I'm still the executive director there. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that works with election officials all over the country and in both parties, trying to make sure elections are run as well as possible, and so that voters have confidence that their vote matters and will count in the Civil Rights Division.
This seems to be a very significant issue because of the president of the United States in this moment, making it seem as though this election is going to somehow be uniquely different because of mail-in ballots. But you've written extensively about how mail-in ballots, we shouldn't expect any significant increase in any type of fraud of any type through mail-in ballots. Tell us about the reality versus the specter that Donald Trump is casting over it.
So first of all, the election will be different this year, and it's not because of the mail-in ballots, it's because of the pandemic. This is the first presidential election we will have ever held during the global pandemic, when we'll need to maintain social distancing, when we'll need to be wearing masks and make sure we're adequately sanitizing polling places, et cetera. And a lot of people don't want to vote in person. Now, I will say voting in person is still a really good option. There are going to be a lot of safe options to vote in person, and I think it's going to be at least as safe, if not more safe, than, for instance, going to the grocery store. And Dr. Fauci has confirmed that. So if you want to vote in person, especially early, that's still a very good way to vote. But mail voting is going to be expanded like we've never seen it before. In 2016, we saw about a quarter of all votes being cast being mail ballots. This year, it could be around half of all votes being cast being mail ballots. And we know from states that are doing a lot of mail voting, states like Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, and California, that fraud is very rare in mail voting, just as fraud is very rare in in-person voting. It's not non-existent, but it's very close to being non-existent. And voters should feel secure whether they choose to vote their ballot by mail, where there are a lot of checks and balances in place to make sure that every vote is validly cast, or if they choose to vote in person, where the same checks and balances are in place to make sure that only eligible voters vote and can only vote once.
I want to dig into that a little more, but before we do, I want to go back to something that you said, because I had not heard it before, and I don't know how many people in the audience have actually heard that. But you said that in terms of the risk of transmission of this virus, voting in person would be somewhat analogous, if not safer, than going to the grocery store. Could you just kind of reiterate that for the audience?
Sure, especially if people plan. There's going to be options to vote early in person, where you choose where you can go, where you can choose when you can go. And more, I'm helping advise LeBron James More Than a Vote initiative, which is helping to make sure that a lot of sports arenas are used, for instance, as early voting sites. There was just some announcement today in Philadelphia about the Philadelphia 76ers arena being used, and several other arenas all over the country, including in California, all the way across the country. So there are going to be a lot of great options to vote in places that are very large, where you can socially distance, where if you plan your activity, you can be in there less time than you would be in a grocery store. And unlike a grocery store where people might be milling about in aisles and you might be close to other people, all of the voting stations are going to be very farther apart than we've ever seen them before, to make sure people don't have any issues. And all poll workers are going to be wearing masks and have PPE. And similarly, voters are going to have masks available if they didn't bring them, and most will be wearing masks, of course. The equipment will all be disinfected. I've talked to election officials around the country. They are committed to making sure that those who choose to vote in person are going to have a safe experience. And you can maximize your chance of having a safe experience by planning and voting as early as possible.
Early. So let's talk about those people who still, despite everything that you just said, which is reassuring to me, still decide to do mail-in ballots. There's such a difference from state to state in terms of the window. What can you window for mail-in ballots, getting them in, receiving them, et cetera. Can you give us some general idea about how we should approach mail-in ballots?
Right. So my recommendation here is don't focus on the differences and don't focus on the deadlines. If you want to vote successfully, especially by mail, Focus on the early opportunities. Request your ballot now. In almost every state, you can request a mail ballot for November now. Make sure your voter registration information is up to date by checking your voter registration status on your state election website, which you can do in pretty much every state. Your ballot will be sent to you in most cases in September. Don't let that ballot collect dust. As soon as you get it, if you're ready to vote and you know who you want to vote for, and let's be honest, looking at the polling, most people do know who they're going to vote for.
Right.
Fill out that ballot early and return it early. You can return it as soon as you get it. And if you return it in person, you will guarantee either a drop box or an election office, ideally, you'll guarantee election officials are getting it. The sooner you get your ballot in, the more you maximize your chance that your vote will get there successfully. If you wait for deadlines, if you wait for election day, if you wait for a postmark on election day, that's when you can run into trouble. So my advice to all voters is don't wait for election day. There is no election day. That is just the last day of voting. Vote early if at all possible, whether it's in person or by mail.
And let's talk about that a little bit more. The technical side of it. Well, actually, let me go here first. There's a piece from Axios that came out today that said that there's a possibility that because of mail-in ballots and so many Donald Trump supporters being willing to go to the polls because of the politicization of COVID-19, which we'll get to that at another time. But they expect that there could be a possibility of Donald Trump winning, quote unquote, winning, appearing to win on election night. And then when the mail-in ballots are counted after the fact, about a week later, it will reveal itself to be that Joe Biden would have won. Could you speak to that dynamic and that possibility?
So President Trump is going to say what he's going to say, but this election night in some ways will be different, but in many ways will be the same as previous election nights. We're always getting partial results in. Just because we see early results in a state like Massachusetts that might show Donald Trump slightly leading, or a state like Mississippi that might show Joe Biden slightly leading, of course, we're not going to assume that that's going to mean that Mississippi is going blue or Massachusetts is going red. That's ridiculous. I think the chances of this are relatively slim. We know the states that are going to be close. I don't think it's any shock to people which states that are likely to have a margin that's within 5 percentage points or maybe even be within 1 percentage point or half a percentage points. And when that's the case, every responsible commentator, observer, member of the media, campaign activist, anyone is going to know that we need to wait until all the ballots are counted. But this is, again, relates to what I was saying earlier. The sooner you vote, the sooner you get your ballot in, the more likely it is your ballot is going to be counted on election night. If you wait until later, if your ballot is delivered after election day or on election day, the chances are that your ballot might not be counted on election night, and it might be one of those later ballots. I don't think we're talking about a week. I think we might be talking about at the most a day or two. But if you want to make sure that your ballot is counted on election night, get it in early, and that will hopefully make it so that the states can get as many election results out as possible on election night, so we have a clearer indication of who the winner is sooner.
I don't know. Can you walk us through the process? And you've already made it clear, but I just would like for you to illuminate a little more. You're saying that if they get it in early, it's not like these ballots are sitting around and they don't start counting them until after or on election day. If they have them, then they're in a position to be counted by election night. But take us, go ahead.
Yeah, so it varies by state. And actually, there are some states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, where early votes and mail ballots don't begin counting them or processing them until election day, the morning of election day. But they're going to have teams of people doing that, and they're going to try to get as many of them done as they can. But there are a lot of states, Florida is a great example, where they are counting those ballots. They are starting to process those ballots. And I should say not counting, but processing the ballots. So they're ready for counting well before election day. Florida, I think, is actually going to do a very good job this election. I think we might get the results relatively early in a state like Florida. There are many other states. Arizona is another one where I fully expect that we'll have results fairly early, relatively in the late evening or early morning hours of November 3rd and 4th. But it will vary by state. Probably states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin will take a little bit longer. But the earlier votes are in, the more likely it is they can be processed at the beginning of election day, even in those states, so that they can report them out. If the ballots that come in on election day, especially the ones that aren't voted in person on election day, those might take a little bit longer to count.
So basically, the bottom line is if you don't plan on voting early in person or voting on election day, absolutely under no circumstances should you wait any longer than you absolutely have to get that mail-in ballot in.
We always focus on deadlines, and especially in a presidential election, there are a lot of voters who are not frequent voters, who maybe are doing it for the first time and haven't planned and haven't had a lot of experience in doing this. This is going to be a different year, and I cannot urge voters enough. Plan, do it early, get your vote in early. The chances are that your vote will be successfully counted, that you will have no problem, that you don't need to worry about it, and that your ballot will be counted on the earlier side as soon as it possibly can on election night goes way, way up. You'll be doing election officials a favor, and you'll be doing your fellow voters a favor, because there are voters who are going to need to vote on election day in person. And the fewer people that need to vote on election day in person means the shorter the lines are for those people voting. So do all of your fellow citizens a favor, and if you can, plan, do it early.
Absolutely. David Becker, who is the executive director for the Center for Election Innovation and Research. First, thank you so much for your work and all this valuable, priceless information that you've given us.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.